Megan has officially made the thing. And if you don't win, you should still get yourself the thing because Megan is amazing.
Yeah.
We can say it at the end, but just say it real quick before I forget, because sometimes we get long-winded and I have a call right after this. So
Yeah.
in case we don't get to it at the end.
Yeah. So basically it's the maternity leave planning bundle. It's not a super creative name, but basically you can like use it to plan obviously your maternity leave, because there's so much that goes into that. And I use a lot of the same processes that we use to plan Lacey's maternity leave. But it's also kind of the same things that you can do if you're just taking an extended vacation or just a sabbatical or something like that. So you can really apply the same processes. I just feel like, obviously I've planned client vacations before and I've planned maternity leave, and I just feel like there's just so much more that goes into maternity leave. So that's why it's kind of geared mostly toward that, but you can definitely take it and tweak it for any extended time off, which obviously is important, because I feel like, so often like when you're running a business, you almost like don't think about taking extended time off, or like don't really have there's not really necessarily a blueprint for like, what do I do to like take a month off or something. Exactly. Yeah. So this will help.
And I think that that's what's so good about this. And I think why we have been like almost like talking this to death is because especially for me having a one-on-one business, like I think the most obvious assumption is that I can't do that.
Yeah.
And so that feels really important for both of us to be talking about, because it was so possible in our business. And obviously because of a lot of things that Megan did and that went into it that we can talk about today. But I think it's just really important to hear that, because I think this is why we can start to like resent our businesses and stuff sometimes, because we feel like we can't take that time. And like, trust me, if I can with like an entirely one-on-one business model, anyone can.
Or I feel like it's one of those things where like, you feel like you can only take like 1 month or 2 weeks, or you're almost like limiting yourself and like, oh, I really wish that I could take 3 or 4 months. And like, you're kind of limiting yourself in that sense. So like, I feel like, that's why like we've had so many conversations about this. That's why I created the bundle. Like, I just think that it is so possible. And I think that it's just about kind of planning it out and really thinking through all of the decisions that go into that. So
yes. Lindsay says, I love it. You're supporting badass working mamas. Thank you, Lindsay. And I know you are one of those, and you are about to be back from maternity leave soon too. So congratulations. Oh, she just said I'm on maternity leave now, and there's no way I could have returned after a few weeks. Exactly. And I think 100% same. And I think that it's just important to have these conversations to say like, you don't have to, like, yes, you might have to do a lot of planning on the front end to make sure that you don't have to. But I think in business, we're just so quick to write those things off. And I have so many clients who have kind of come up on the cusp of being about to have a baby or having a baby and kind of being like, oh my God, did I build the wrong business because I can't take extended time off? And what it kind of came down to with everyone is like, actually you can, it's just how do we plan for it? And so I never want someone to feel like, oh, I'm choosing between this business or the time off I need for myself or my family or my baby or whatever. Like that really does not have to be a thing.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure most of y'all know this, but just for a very quick recap, I took about 4 months off. So I took all of April, all of May, all of June, and then, in July, I came back very, very part-time, but it kind of felt like I still had July off. I had base camp with my clients, and so that part was more like on, but it wasn't super intense by any means. And then I had 1 call for each client. So we're talking like a couple calls a day, if that. So I, for all intents and purposes, I basically took 4 months off in my mind and in what my experience was of it. And my husband Kenny was on paternity leave that 4th month too. So we were still just kind of switching on and off, and it felt like I was still, home and doing the maternity leave thing. So I've really only been back for like a week.
Yeah.
Which is crazy, but it has felt really good to be back. And I think in large part, it has felt good to be back because we planned so well. So that's something else I want to share is I don't feel like I came back to like, oh my God, now all this stuff's on my plate and I have all these things to do. And I like had all this work stacking up for me while I was away. Like I haven't felt like that at all. And I think, again, that's another thing to share. I think that sometimes that's why people hesitate to take time off because they're scared what it will feel like when they come back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that that's something that a lot of times, like, people kind of get caught up in like just planning the time off. And I feel like one of the things that we did really well was like, we planned your time off and your transition back and like what that would look like. It was like from day one, we were kind of also planning, you know, your month and 2 months back and what that would look like at the same time, because it really is something where like you want to really look at the full picture of what that looks like.
Yes. If I could like impart one thing, I mean, obviously I have a lot to say today, but if there was like one thing that I feel like worked particularly well, I would say it was that. It was not just being planned for the time that I was gone, but being planned for the months that I came back to, so that I didn't come back feeling overwhelmed, because I think that that's what makes people not want to take time off a lot, is not even just the time that they're gone, but the stress of what it's going to be like to come back. And I just really have not experienced that at all. So like really just wanted to share that too. So maybe we could talk specifics, because I think someone might be be thinking like, what do you mean? Like you plan for your time back? What did that look like?
Yeah.
So you want to share some of that?
So, well, I guess I'll just kind of start by saying like, we started planning everything back in like September, October of last year, something like that. And we just kind of like consistently kept meeting. And so I feel like we just planned, obviously a lot of the stuff that was going to be happening, like the things that we needed to prepare ahead of time for your time off. So like we planned through like, what did marketing look like? What did the podcast look like? What did Instagram look like? What did the Facebook group, all of that kind of stuff. And then obviously what was that going to look like for client on the client side? And how is that going to affect everything there? And then we also really started to plan through like, okay, once you transition back, like, again, what does that look like for like getting clients? Like you said, having one session a month in Basecamp in July was like kind of that transition back in. But then also even like a lot of what we worked through was even with marketing stuff, like for you to be like recording, like you do the monthly Q&A videos for your wait list and stuff like that, where, you know, we repurposed some older videos, like the most popular videos for during your maternity leave when you were off. But then like once you were back, it wasn't something where it was like the day you're back, all of a sudden you're having to like jump back in and record 50 things and like all of this. So it was like, we also started to plan through like, you know, allowing you to transition slowly back into the creation side of things as well.
Exactly. And I think that that's really important too, because it's like, sometimes we forget that that's just as much part of our job as the other pieces of our job, like the calls and stuff like that. So that part worked really well, is having a plan for coming back. And like, when I was back part-time in July, I didn't do, I think, any content creation in July whatsoever. So that was really helpful as like a transition point, is to just get to come back. And like, if I wanted to, I could. I think, you know, that was open. I think I might've recorded some client lessons, but it wasn't necessary at all. Yeah. And that was really, really, really helpful.
And I think that was like kind of our approach, like during your maternity leave, but then also in kind of like the transition back, was like, there's always the option for you to be like, hey, and I think you did this a couple of times, like you're just like, hey, I'm, you know, feeling inspired to just like hop on Instagram stories today and do like a Q&A or something like that. Yeah. But it wasn't like, it was just because you wanted to, and not necessarily because we were like, team was depending on you for that. And if you didn't do it, we just had nothing to put out or something like that. Right. So I feel like that just really alleviated the pressure on you, and kind of gave you so much freedom to just kind of show up if
Yes,
and when you wanted to.
Totally. I have so much more to say about that, but Lindsay has a good question. I just want to make sure we don't forget,
Yeah.
which was like, what was the process if there were questions, problems, or troubleshooting items while I was gone? So, well, let me just add what I was going to say there, and then we can move on to that, because that's kind of a great segue, Linz. But one of the things that I would say didn't work well, although like I'm gonna like say it in parentheses because obviously I can do whatever the fuck I want. It's my business, right? But I thought I would want to share a lot more than I did. Like before I left, I remember saying to Megan, oh, like I think I'll really miss interaction because I'm not going to be on calls all day. I'll probably be on stories more. I'll probably share on social more. I'm sure I'll want to share pictures of the baby, etc. And I think like you said, there were maybe like a couple times that I felt like doing that, but I just didn't most of the time. And I think it was interesting because as much as that's what didn't work, what did work about that is I just gave myself grace for that to not be a thing. Like at the end of the day, I think I would have a lot more success in terms of like social media and things like that if I was sharing a lot more personally and behind the scenes. I've just never done that in the 7 years I've been in business. And I thought maybe if I'm not on calls for the majority of the day, like would I want to do that? And I just don't. Like I think it's just a personality thing. Like at this juncture of my life, like that does not feel as fun to me as I wish it did. I'm very envious of the people who it does feel really fun for. For me, it's not it. And Megan even like tried to creatively help me figure out a couple ways that might be easy for me to do it, or that might be helpful. And I just never feel lit up by it. And I really try to do the things in my business that I actually feel lit up by. And that does not happen to be one of them. But it was cool to see that like, because in my mind, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'd probably share a lot more if I wasn't like on one-on-one calls and stuff like that. Turns out
that's not it.
That's not accurate. That's not true at all. But it was kind of nice because it removed that story from my head. And it's just like, at the end of the day, I just don't want to. Like, I don't even have like a really good reason for it, except for the fact that when I go to do it, it feels heavy and not fun. And I really, really try very hard to mostly do the things that feel good and fun. But the few times I did, I enjoyed it. Like when I did like a maternity leave Q&A or something like that, I think. And like, that was super fun. Like I liked it. I just wouldn't like that all the time. So anyway, I think that was just interesting where it's like, I can both see that would probably be something that would like genuinely make a huge difference in terms of like my, whatever views, comments, whatever. And I just didn't feel like it. So, I think that was like a what worked and when didn't, but I think that sometimes time off is a clarifier is sort of what I wanted to say there, where it can show you like, I've had clients take time off and be like, oh, I actually realized I loved this thing about my business. I thought I hated, I just needed space from it. Or for me, it was the opposite. Oh, I actually thought if I had more space, I would do this thing. And turns out I wouldn't. But either way, it's like helpful.
Yeah.
Megan was like, I fucking knew you weren't going to do it.
No, I know. I was like, I mean, maybe I was actually really curious because I was like, well, maybe if same thing where like, I was like, well, maybe if you're not on calls all day, if you do have that space, like maybe that would change. And then it didn't. And I was like, okay.
You're like, yeah. Thank you, Leslie. I love when you shared some snippets of your maternity, and I totally respect you taking space for your personality. Yeah. And I think I'll probably just always be like that. I mean, obviously I reserve the right to change my mind. Like, 3 months from now, I might think that's like the most fun thing on earth, and that's cool too. But yeah, I'm glad that I honored that piece. Okay, so let's answer Lindsay's question because I think that's a great one, and then we can kind of segue into some other stuff. But she basically said, what was the process if there were questions, problems, or troubleshooting items that needed my attention? I'll share my philosophy and then you can kind of share the process. But so I think this is personal preference and personality. I feel like in our space, everything gets labeled as so like good or bad one way or the other. for me, my personal preference was I wasn't taking maternity leave to have all this space and time away from my business. I really like my business and I really like interacting with Megan and I really enjoy a lot of that stuff. So my take was I am available for questions, problems, and troubleshooting stuff. Because that felt good to me. And that's another thing I'll share about what worked in a few minutes is that it felt really good to me to have these little pockets in which I was in the business. It was never my goal to be like, I'm not doing
Off
anything.
the grid kind of
Yeah,
thing,
yeah. I think for some people it might be totally opposite. And again, that's okay. And I think we can make it wrong either way. We can be like, oh, if you like want nothing to do with your business, you have the wrong business. Or like, oh, if you like want to be partially in your business while you're off, like you're a workaholic, whatever. Like,
yeah,
I don't think it's either of those things. I think it's just a personal preference. And so what I had said to Megan is like, I'll look in Basecamp, probably not daily, but regularly. If you have something non-urgent, toss it in there. If there is something urgent, like text me. I'm like not unreachable. I'm just like probably sitting holding a baby. So like by all means, that was sort of my philosophy on it. But Megan, you can share the specifics of that. Hey, Sarah.
Yeah. And I'll just say too, like for me, I feel like just knowing that alleviated so much pressure and so much stress from me because I felt like, okay, knowing that the option was there, knowing that I could tax Lacey, knowing that I could, like if I needed something like that, it wasn't completely like off the table.
Yeah.
Right. So I feel like it was one of those things where that just helped me kind of, I don't know, like I felt like I could kind of discern between like, cool, is this something I want to bother Lacey about? Or is it something I can just handle? Or can it wait until like we had a call once a month while Lacey was off? And so it was like, I knew when those calls were scheduled for, so I could just like write down things if it was non-urgent or whatever. So anyway, basically like the process that we had was, anytime that if team was doing something and they had a question, like if question came through support inbox or in the Facebook group or anything like that, they would flag it and they would send it to me. And then I would typically just handle whatever and make a decision on it, kind of deal with whatever. If I wasn't sure if it was something that needed Lacey's attention, then I would kind of just filter it through, like, is it something that needs an immediate answer? Or kind of like more or less like within a day type of thing, whatever. Or is it something that can wait until the next time that we talk? And sometimes that depended because it was like, if our call is next week, then it's probably just going to wait until next week. But if we just had a call last week and so it's going to be another month, then it might be something where I actually reach out about. So it was a little bit of, it kind of depended on the situation, but we did have kind of a filtering process through like where things kind of like went through different, what do I want to say, like different stages, I guess.
Yeah, totally. And I think you very rarely text me about anything. I think it was like maybe one thing ever.
Yeah.
Hi guys. Hi, Sarah. Lindsay says she wasn't totally off the grid either. Yeah. And I think like that's okay. I feel like to me, it's about like what feels joyful and good to you and not like, oh, you have to be off the grid or you're running the wrong business or something like that. Hi, Kristen. She says, love that you're sharing this. Hey, Emily, so good to see you. And you too, Sarah. Okay. So, what I did want to share that worked on that note is that I basically stayed the tiniest bit in the business the whole time without having to be like in service or forward facing. So like Megan said, we had calls once a month. And I had like little things, like the little snippet at the beginning of the newsletter I was doing review on or adding in like my personal, share there. Or I was reviewing some of our podcast show notes. Now Megan would give them to me like 2 weeks in advance or whatever. So I had like a huge runway, but it kind of felt nice to be connected enough being like, oh, this is the podcast that's going out this week, or oh, like this is what we're saying in our newsletter. Like I just felt like I kind of had my pulse still on it a little bit, or the pulse of it still a little bit, but none of it felt pressured or time constrained. And that was really what was really helpful. And I think that that's, again, something to think about, where like, would that feel better to you, but you're making yourself wrong, thinking you should be fully off? To me, it really felt like I didn't want to feel like I was living separate lives almost. Like I really wanted to love and enjoy the maternity leave and soak it in, which I feel like I did a fantastic job of, but I didn't want to feel like, okay, now like this whole new life begins. Like I wanted to still feel like myself, and myself has been running this business for 7 years. Do you know what I mean? So, and that was something, you know, I had gotten a lot of feedback from people about with motherhood, is it can feel like you lose yourself. And so I didn't want to kind of set myself up for that in a way. And I haven't felt like that. So I think that was part of what worked. Part of a short piece of what didn't with that was, I think I thought I would be ready to have calls with Megan a little earlier than I was, because Penny's schedule is super flexible. So I always knew I could, you know, have him take Bennett, but I was so not ready for that, more than I thought. Like, I just thought like, oh yeah, like I'll just hand the baby off. Who cares? Like that, not who cares, but I mean, my philosophy before
like easy,
having
it's
him
fine.
was like,
yeah,
like he has a father that can hold him. But I think we had a call scheduled for about 2 weeks after I had him. And I remember texting you and being like, I simply cannot kind of thing. And obviously you so graciously moved it, but that was just something that kind of like surprised me, is I physically could have done the call, but I physically could not have done it, if that makes sense. And I think I underestimated how distracting it would be to try to have him there on a call. Like that was another thought I had. Well, like, oh, if Penny's busy, like I'll just hold him while I have a call. And like, in theory I could have, but also like not as simple as I had intended that to be. So there were just like a lot of little things that I learned of like, oh, I wasn't ready as quick as I thought I was, or I actually didn't want to post in the way I thought I was, or I'm not going to just like bring him to calls or something like that. But what was nice is like our process was flexible enough that it was fine for me to have all of those realizations, basically.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like we really intentionally tried to like bake in a lot of flexibility, especially in those first few months, right? Where like we really tried to make sure that like even with like the content reviews and stuff, where it's like, it doesn't matter if you don't get to this for like 2 or 3 weeks, right? Like it's fine. And worst case scenario, if you like don't even do that, it's not a big deal, you know? So it's like,
it can still go out. It's not like,
exactly. It's And so I think that was really something that the planning process that we did really worked to support. Like we almost like baked in a lot of flexibility there, so that we could have the freedom and to kind of figure things out, especially in the first few months.
Yes. And then also like having had those conversations, knowing that I had the permission to do that, like the permission to say to you, hey, I'm like not well enough, not well, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not well enough
there.
to leave the baby. Yeah. And so it was nice just having that permission. It didn't feel like, oh, like Megan's like counting on me to be on this call, and like there are questions that have to get answered and stuff like that. It was more like we were having touch points because it felt good to have touch points. It wasn't like we were having touch points because nothing would have moved forward without it. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah.
Yes. Lindsay loves that we scheduled calls to check in about it. Hey, Elisa, it's so good to see you. Oh, hi, Maggie. She says yes to integrating different parts of ourselves at our own pace. Love this. Thank you. Kelsey said the planning and scheduling you guys did to prepare is truly amazing. Oh, thank you, Kelsey. Yeah. I mean, listen, I think that I talk about trade-offs all the time. And I think this is just one of those things, which is like, if I want to have a one-on-one business model and I want to be able to take time off, a lot of planning and scheduling is going to go into it. And that's a trade-off I'm here for all day, every day, because I have Megan to do it. No kidding. No, but really, like, it's a trade-off I'm happy to to take is like, surely I'm happy to plan for it. But, you know, something that it showed me too, that I wanted to share is that I could do this a lot more if I wanted to. Like, I don't know that I will, but like, you know, a thought that I had, if you're my client, do not freak out. I'm not saying I'm going to do this. I'm just sharing thoughts. But like a thought I had is like, oh, I could like, you know how I took July part-time, like maybe I'll take December's part-time. Because usually people take a lot of downtime in December anyway. Like maybe that'll always be a part-time month for me and I'll spend even more time with Bennett over the holidays, or I usually take the last 2 weeks off, but I'm like, maybe that whole month will be part-time. Like, I'm not saying I'm doing it, but I'm just saying like, it opened my eyes to how easy it could be to take the time when I wanted to take the time. And I think that's been a gift because, you know, like, or maybe as Bennett gets older, I'll do that in July or something like that if he's off for the summer or whatever. But it just showed me like, this is so possible. It takes effort and planning and attention. And I wouldn't tell Megan in June that I'm doing that for July. But if I told her in January, then like, I think we could just like make that work so easily.
Totally. And I think that that's something that is really, from the team perspective, that I do think is worth kind of talking through too, is like really having those conversations with your team and starting to plan things in advance, even if you don't have all the details mapped out or figured out yet, but just kind of starting to plan earlier. Like, I feel like that's what made the whole process that much easier, because we started, you know, like I said, like September or October, for you to be taking off April, May, June, and half part-time in July. You know what I mean? So I feel like that was just super helpful and really a big reason why everything went so smoothly.
Yep, 100%. Belinda, you made me laugh. Belinda said, I'm still processing your last absence. Let's not put more on you than I can handle. Noted, Belinda. No worries. Not happening this year. Elisa said, this is an amazing takeaway. I could do this more. I feel like we don't allow ourselves, I feel like we don't allow ourselves to take much time off with one-on-one clients. So I love this. Yes, 100%. It is possible. Belinda is still well and fine and functioning. And that was a big takeaway for me too, is like, my clients are well. Do you know what I mean? Like, they are good, right? Kayla said that's how she felt after having twins. Oh my gosh, go you, girl. My business doesn't need me as much as I thought it did. Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of amazing, right? And Sarah said the same, like learning how easy it was to take time off and that you can do it again and still have a successful business and happy clients. And taking a full week off this month after also taking a recent maternity leave, and like, you will probably go part-time around the holidays. So cool. Right. Like, and actually, I mean, not that I want to get into this because I'm still fragile, but right when I came back from maternity leave is when my dad passed away. And so like, I had to take more time. And, you know, I'm so grateful for the gift that was maternity leave, and showing me, like, I didn't hesitate for a second. I mean, obviously I wouldn't have, because it was like a family tragedy that I needed to address. But I mean, it was just nice not being like, oh, but I can't take time. It was like, oh, I know I can take the time. And I think that is such a freaking gift, you know?
100%.
Elisa says, something interesting that happens for me when I'm off, like on vacation, I feel more disconnected from my goals and like nothing is moving forward. Maybe just a mindset thing. So I'll say two things about that. One is, my philosophy going into maternity leave was kind of like, the one thing I can control is my mindset. Like, I don't have time, nor am I going to take the time to control like strategically planning the rest of our year's goals or shit like that. But like, I'm like holding this baby and giving him a bottle. So like, what I can control is what I'm thinking about during that time. And that was kind of my philosophy going in. And I think I kept to that in some regard. I think I was pretty good at like sending positive energy to my business every day and like thinking in a helpful way about it. But what I actually think I realized more than that is like, it's just okay if there are some times where you're not totally attached to like this thing and this next, and are just like so fully present. Like, I think that was one of the things I loved and did well on maternity leave, is try to just be like so present in that moment as opposed to in all the next moments. And I think that can be true of time off or vacation. Like, how can we, yes, stay connected in some sense, but also like just be fully present in the thing that we're in, and then know that when you get back into the business, like you can get back and be more connected. Like even just in this last week that I've been back, I've been feeling so much more like on fire, and like I have this idea and I want to do this thing. I'm sure, Megan, you can even feel that shift.
For sure. I mean, it's definitely something where like, I also think that sometimes you need, like you as in like all of us, like people need to be able to kind of unplug and not be so hyper connected to everything in order to kind of like come back into it and like keep with the energy that we want to in our businesses, and to stay connected to the big picture and all of that. Like I think is kind of a lot of what like my entire business name White Space is kind of centered around, is like you need to be able to create that white space in order to continue to show up, and in order to, you know, be like stay inspired and be connected with like your creativity and all of that. So I think that it's one of those things where like we just can't make it wrong if we're not like, if we do just like enjoy the downtime and enjoy the time off, you know.
100%. And again, I think it's just like what's the word I want to use? It's almost like a kind of like toxic piece of our industry to an extent, where it's like you always have to be like on to the next thing, on to the next goal. And then there's like really positive pieces of that too. But yeah, it's just seeing where it's like, oh, okay, like me always being connected to that isn't the only thing that moves me forward. Sometimes me like relishing in everything the business has given me and being really present for that. Like that's what I try to do so much on maternity leave, is like thank my business for letting me be so present in that moment, as opposed to feeling like, okay, like what do I need to like do next? Like I remember a couple of times on maternity leave, Kenny tried to talk to me about like, be back excited about like all the NFT stuff. And he was like, what are you doing for that when you come back? Have you figured that out? Have you thought about that yet? And like my brain would like try, but I just couldn't get there. And I would have to be like, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that, because I don't know. But like, again, since I've been back, I've thought about that like a ton actually. And so I think it's just good to like, again, both and kind of thing, right?
Totally.
Yes. Alessia says the white space really helps me come back fresh. I think that's so true. Okay, what else did I want to say? I wrote notes. I think that's most of like the pieces that I wanted to share. I think Megan can share a little bit more on like what it looked like for team to kind of like run with stuff while I was gone. And I also wanted to, one other thing I wanted to share too, I think I've said this like pretty much every time I've talked about it, but it feels important to keep saying, is where I feel like a lot of people get tripped up with time off is they think it has to look how it's always looked. And the truth is like our reach and engagement has certainly gone down with me being gone. We've certainly put out less new content. We've certainly repurposed way more than we've ever had. But that can be okay. Like those are things that like you can like come back and like get back into. And then also like other really good things came of that. Like so many of the clients that did live streams in this group have told me that they got clients and sales from those live streams, right? So those were like other positive things that like I'm not typically helping my clients make a bunch of, well, I guess I'm always helping my clients make a bunch of sales. But like, you know what I'm saying? Not in that direct correlation way where we're like marketing them and they like make a sale, right? So like there were other cool things that were happening, even if like, yeah, of course our numbers are going to go down and our reach is going to go down and stuff like that. Like, I think we probably had less people sign up for the wait list in that time frame than we've maybe ever had sign up for the wait list. Like all of that's okay. As long as you have a plan for like coming back and getting it back up. I think again, such a toxic thing in our industry can be like, you can never take a dip or you're like imploding kind of thing. And I think it's more like, it's just normal that if you're pieced out for a while, that's going to happen. And like can that be okay? You know?
Mhm. And I think that like, it's also one of those things where like nothing really stopped entirely. It's not like, oh, well, we're just like shutting down the business for 4 months, right? It just
Right.
looked like it just looked very different. And we just, like you said, like repurposed a lot more and kind of like leaned into a lot of the assets that we had created over the past 6 years to kind of like help have this kind of, time where we weren't putting out like new content and stuff like that. And so I think that, yeah, like it was kind of like we planned for this, 4-month period for that to look different. And then also planned for the months when you're back, where like, how can we like re-engage and kind of get kind of reintegrated into everything. So it's like also thinking about it as like, it's a temporary shift. This isn't just like, okay, full stop. This is just it now, right?
Absolutely. And on that note, I think it's so important to say too, that like, that's why mindset and energy matters, because we didn't change the strategy that much, you guys. And it's just that my energy was out of the business. And I think that people can make that so wrong sometimes, where they're like, oh, well, I want a business that's not dictated on my energy. It's like, well, I don't know how you're going to have anything that's not dictated on your energy. But like, the more you can just realize that and be okay that your energy is going to ebb and flow a little bit toward it sometimes, or there's going to be times where, it's pulled back significantly. Like, that can be okay too. I know that when my energy comes back into it, because I'm full and fulfilled and had a beautiful maternity leave, all that's going to take care of itself. So I think that that's just like helpful to see too, where like when we're saying sometimes that like strategy isn't the only thing, this is the perfect example of strategy isn't the only thing, because our strategy, like we take MFC, our strategy and execution stayed relatively on
Mostly
par.
the
My
same.
execution obviously went down, but team took on a lot of that. There was one factor, which is just like, I didn't have my energy in it each day and each week. And so, I think that that's just important to say too, where that's not like a thing I'm beating myself up for. That's just a thing to be like, yeah, of course. And then when my energy comes back into it, of course, it gets easier from there.
Yeah. Yeah. It has been interesting, like from my perspective, like to see kind of it, especially like as of last week, it felt like a very big shift of like, Lacey's in it now. And like, here's kind of like, you can just tell that there is just that different energy in the business. And so, yeah, but like kind of in terms of, basically a lot of like the strategy that we did, like we did a lot of the same stuff. So team was just repurposing a lot more content and repurposing a lot more things. And then we had all of the guest live streams with clients. And so a lot of that is stuff that like in the months leading up to Lacey's maternity leave, she and I talked through all of that and kind of planned, okay, what do we want to do for like Instagram posts? What do we want to do for stories? What do we want to do for client lessons? What do we want to do for live streams? Like all of that. And it was essentially like we went through everything that we were already doing and just kind of figured out like, how do we shift it? Like, what do we need to have it be slightly different so that, we're just kind of leaning on other content that we have during those months. And just kind of organized, like we really planned out all of that in advance. And then it was super easy while Lacey was gone. We're like, team and I knew exactly what was happening. Like, it wasn't like we were scrambling last minute to like, oh, we need somebody else to do a live stream next week or something. Like we even had contingency plans of like, if something happened with a client live stream, which it did. And so we had backup plans. And then even with, the first, like we kind of planned for Lacey's maternity leave to start basically like
a week later than
it actually did. But we had same thing, like we had contingency plans, like we had talked through that. We had emails already drafted and stuff like that I think were just really helpful, because then it was like when things happened, like we kind of already knew how to handle them and what to do in those situations. And that's what I think really helped, so that it limited, I wasn't reaching out to you constantly being like, oh my gosh, this happened, like fire, like help kind of thing. Like we just already had all of that planned out.
And something else I'll say on that front too, is that as a now new mom with a young baby, it has helped me feel so much more secure in the business too, because I know that we've been so good at making plans and adjusting plans and all of those kind of things. And so it hasn't felt like a fire drill or reactive or rigid or anything like that. And that's been very like peace giving to me, being like, I know things will come up, having a kid that just simply didn't come up before that was true. And it's given me so much evidence that we will roll with that really, really, really well. And that we'll have plans upon backup plans for that. And not in like I want to be really clear that this isn't like in an anxiety driven way of like, what if this goes wrong? And what if that goes wrong? It's more like, okay, well, realistically, babies come out of your body when they want to. So like, let's have a thought in place for that. Or like, realistically, you may feel great on maternity leave, or like, you may have a really difficult experience, And so we just tried to like, know we were set up for both of it. And I think we'll just continue to do that from here on out, which is like, Bennett might be perfectly scheduled and whatever, but like if our nanny gets sick, or if this happens, or if that happens, like what are the other plans for that? Again, not in this way of like, we have to be perfect, or there's all this reactivity and anxiety, but like kind of the opposite, where it's like, I don't want to wait until that happens to have to figure it out,
100%. Yeah.
Oh, this is a great question. Alessia says, how do you keep motivated for planning so much in advance? I feel like when there's a lot of time, I tend to focus on what's on hand or procrastinate because there seems to be so much time, right? That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'll let you go first, Megan, then I'll take it.
I think that like, just like systems wise, like what our process was that we really did was like, I was kind of forced myself to be pretty disciplined in like keeping us on track with things, where like we met regularly, like we had separate calls for maternity leave planning and stuff that was like separate from our regular calls. So we didn't change any of like our regular team meetings and stuff, because that was kind of the more like, this is what's going on right now type of stuff. And then we like blocked out separate times to meet specifically for maternity leave planning and planning all of that. And then I similarly had that blocked into my schedule too, where it was like, I kind of segmented it in my brain of like, this is a different like project and client almost, where like I had to kind of keep it separate from kind of the day-to-day stuff. And I feel like chipping away at that really helped, because then we weren't really scrambling at the last minute. And also like things could get pushed back a little bit. Like we had tons of breathing room where there were some things that kind of got pushed around because like with the NFT stuff, like that changed our timeline a little bit, because then we did have more energy to focus on the NFT. But it was like, because we had started planning so early, we could have some extra breathing room, right?
Yes, I think that's a great way to say it. And for me, the way I treated it was basically like, if you guys have heard me talk about team and stuff, that like if Megan gives me a to-do, I will meet that to-do every time. I am incredibly motivated to be very respectful of our team and our deadlines. And so when Megan would give me something to do for maternity leave planning, she would give me a due date on it. And not quite there, a due date on it. And I would just treat that as like, that was the due date, even though I knew technically like, okay, whatever, it's still 2 months away. If I wanted to push it, I could push it. But I really, really just tried to like treat that as like, this is when it is actually due. And that helped me a lot. So I would say like, probably what you're saying is like, if you're kind of procrastinating and whatever, it's probably just not something that's like in the calendar or has a due date or whatever. And that's kind of like what has worked for us, to just treat it like it's that important.
I think also like chipping away at it, like not like having it be this like, okay, I need to spend 5 hours planning out all my content for my entire maternity leave. Like, hi, no one's going to want to do that. Like, that sounds
I would
overwhelming.
never do that.
No,
Yeah.
I would never do that. Like, so I think it's also like breaking it down, and almost like, I'm pretty sure that one of the things that I had done was like, every other week I blocked out like an extra hour or something like that to just plan like 2 weeks of the maternity leave content or something. So it was like, I was never sitting down and planning like hours upon hours of stuff. And it was just kind of like chipping away constantly. So then it, you know, ended up being where like a month later, I'm like, cool, it's all done, rather than like procrastinating on the big picture thing. Right.
I think you just said something so perfectly that I talk to clients about all the time, just even on projects or whatever. And Alexius, and this could be applied to a new project too, but exactly that, which is like, most of us do not have these huge blocks of time to work through something. And even if we do, most of us would be overwhelmed by that. I have like a very small subset of clients who would plan it all out in 5 hours and would work best like that. Most of us don't. And so you just have to find the way to be like, this gets an hour of my week, or this gets, 2 hours of attention this week or whatever. And like over time, that's the stuff that like really adds up and gives you what you want. Or if not, most of us would put it off for 4 months and then try to do it in like 1 5-hour chunk, and then just be like, this shit's too hard, forget it.
Yeah.
So I think that that's a really big thing. And we broke it down into small tasks. Like, it was never like on my to-do list was like, write all emails for maternity leave or something like that. It would be like, write the email that we'll send to clients on the day you come back to work or something like that. Well, that's going to take me 10 minutes and I can easily knock that out and hit that deadline. But if I had the list of like the seven emails I had to write or whatever, I would have put that off forever.
Yeah.
Like literally, I know myself. I would have been like trying to do that on the way to the hospital or something, but like, it has to be small and bite-sized. Again, for most people, I think I can think of a few people who would be like, oh no, I really would just write all 7 at once. But only test that if you know that that's like your personality and that really fits you. Most of us like need to like chip away at it, especially if you're otherwise running a business.
Right, exactly. Especially when there's so much, I feel like when there's so much like day-to-day stuff to focus on, I feel like that's when like, oh, I can't possibly go dedicate 5 hours on this thing because so many other things need my attention. So if you kind of limit that and you're like, okay, I am going to prioritize this for like a half hour or whatever, and kind of just add that into your day-to-day schedule or weekly, whatever, it just becomes much more doable, and it feels more attainable, I think.
Yeah,
for the most
totally
people.
agree with that. Exactly. Okay, awesome. All right. So I think that's kind of all we had to share. One of the things I had said we were going to share, which just to be very transparent about, was what would we have done differently? And Megan and I talked about this extensively, and like, not to sound like a total asshole, but the answer is nothing. I think we did a great job. Like, I'm just going to like give us this win and say, if we had a lesson to tell you there, we would be happy to tell you. But like, I really don't think there's much that we would have done differently. And I feel really grateful for that. I can't even come up with like Megan said this to me too. She's like, I can't even come up with like a spin on something I would do differently, or like well, this, but this, like, really, I think it went better than I could have ever hoped. And I'm so grateful to you for that, Megan. It truly did. And so that leads me to being like, and you should get Megan's template if you're going to do this, because there is truly nothing I would do different or change. Like, I think I will consistently look back at that as one of the things I'm like most grateful for in my business, is being able to have that time and have it be stress-free. And I'm just so thankful to you for that.
I love you.
I love
it. Was just like, I really enjoyed like the entire process too. And I feel like,
and this is why Megan's sick in the head, and you need to go to her for all your planning, because she loves planning.
I'm like, this is great. No, but I feel like it definitely is. Like, honestly, if I could like share the biggest piece of advice for me is to like start planning early and to just like allow yourself that space and start making decisions early and all of that. And I think that it's one of those things where it's easy to think like, oh my gosh, I have so much time. It's so far away. Like I can figure that stuff out later. There's all these other things that need my attention. And what made both like your actual leave, but even like the 2 months before you were off, what made that not feel really stressful and chaotic was because we had started planning so early. And I think that, that's just something that I just feel like the reason we don't have anything that we would have done differently is because we did so much leading up to it. Right. So
yes, 100%. So good. All right. So Megan, you will drop the link to it, but remember, if you commented today, you're entered to win, and we will pick a winner tomorrow. And just thank you guys for being back with us. I feel so happy and so lit up to be back doing this. And I'm just so
me too. I feel like it's so fun. It's good to be back and good to have you back, obviously.
So good. All right, guys, have a beautiful week, and I will be here next week, and Megan will be here next month. Bye, y'all.
Thanks, guys.